there. In this video, I'm going to show you how to start a painting. In art, we have to have some discipline, the discipline of art to paint well. One of the first things I do is to look for a photo or an image that inspires me by its shapes, the lights, and or maybe the colors. Some kind of theme that might involve the design, or perhaps there's something else that inspires you to do a piece. The first basic thing I choose is the crop and the format. I decide whether to do a portrait, a landscape format, or square. To make the choices easier for myself later, I used Photoshop to posterize this image and also to change the saturation. I made it brighter, and also the hue more to a blue-green background mountain. I also do a grayscale image of the photo so that I can see the values within the image, and I put the third grids on for easier drawing. The next step is to do a value sketch with a soft pencil. When you're making the format into your sketchbook, make sure it's square to square. Often I see with beginner painters that they're not accurate with this, which can really affect your design. This image is overall mid-tone to darker, so I start with a sketch that has a ground onto the sketch. And then I put in a line drawing, very simple basic shapes, just to decide where things go. And at this point I might move around the mountain points or the tree points. I want to make sure that this is a pleasing design. Luckily the photo is quite nice on its own, and there's just a few things to change. In doing this sketch, I'm really aware of what I want my focal point to be, which will be the glacier of snow in the background as well as the blue-green mountain. Doing this type of sketch makes you really aware of what you're looking at. It's very surprising what you'll discover as you're drawing. The value bar on the left is a reminder to me that I will have 2 lights, 2 midtones, and 2 darks within this painting. But in this value sketch, I'm forcing myself to put things either into the light, the midtone, or the dark. I was first taught this method by Mike Svob, who is a fabulous Canadian painter, and his paintings are very vibrant. And the reason why his paintings work so well is he goes through this process of making sure that he has a tonal value plan. Here I am showing you just one value sketch, but in reality you can do 5, 6, 10 of these in all different formats, and then decide which way you want to do the painting. The sketchbook paper has been gessoed with white gesso, and I took some tape, which I took some of the sticky off, and just framed the piece that I'm going to do to make it nice and clean. The first thing I'll do is create a ground of raw umber that's been thinned with acrylic gloss medium. While the ground was drying on my sketchbook paper, I went back to my palette and I mixed an almost white, a mid-tone gray, and then I used raw umber straight from the tube. Under the glass is Gray Matters palette paper, which is 50% gray, so my middle gray is matched to that tone. On the palette as well is Mars Black and some more titanium white. I've done an almost white of the black paint, and then I have pure black paint. The Mars Black or black paint is darker than raw umber, and the purpose of that is I don't want to go to my full darks or my full lights for the first part of the study. This practice forces me to put all my shapes into the 3 different shades, thereby simplifying what I'm painting. I know I can add final darks and final hits of light at the end of this study. While I'm doing this little tonal study, I'm looking for places where I can join edges up between different mass shapes. This is called lost edges. I'm also looking for places where I want the edges to be very clear, and it's the edges that guide the eye around the painting, creating a rhythm and a harmony, and also it creates the design that you want to have. The strongest edges in this little study are the tops of the trees, which are creating a little bit of a zigzaggy up and down type of rhythm, and I'm having one tree point up right into that glacier on the mountain, which helps lead the eye to the focal point. To lose some of the edges of the tops of the trees, I'm creating a darker area in the background mountain behind the left side of those trees. This helps to move our eye to the right-hand side to the focal point of the glacier. Here I'm taking the Mars Black and doing little hits of the darkest areas. Some of it will be the inside of those vertical trees and the shadows underneath the rocks, and little bits in the background mountain as well. I think now I'll remove the tape and assess the painting and see if there's anything I need to move or add. I made sure to have mixed enough of the three shades to be able to go back at this stage and make little corrections of edges and see where I might want to lose some edges, and also make any kind of design changes while that paint is still wet. One of the design changes I decided to do was to add a little more width onto the tree in the center to make it move more to the right-hand side. I'm pleased with my tonal value study, the way I look past those trees to the glacier and how the glacier just appears up into the sky. So let's go on with the color study. To learn more about the colors I chose for the color study, check out my blog post on how to start a painting. Sometimes I'll paint my studies on a canvas, but quite often I'll do them in my sketchbook. When doing my painted line drawing, I will use paint or a white chalk or one of those acrylic paint pens or a pencil. It doesn't really matter. It depends on what you're doing with your painting and what works best for you. By using this soupy mixture of paint, I can lightly block in some of the more solid shapes to make it easier for me to see what I want to draw in regards to line later. In general, I use straight lines for doing my line drawing. And for that reason, I prefer to use a nice sharp flat brush for drawing, and it's a lot easier than using a round brush. When I need to erase a line, I use a moist paper towel to wipe off, and then I do the line again. When doing my line drawing, I make sure to look at the tonal study that I made as well as the photo. If I only looked at the photo, I would tend to copy it exactly and not do the revisions that I already made in the tonal piece. Once I have my line drawing done, I set up my palette with my paints. In general, I have a warm and cool of each primary, and perhaps chromium oxide green and a purple color such as dioxazine violet, and I quite often use cadmium orange as well. I always squeeze out my paints on the same spot on my palette. This makes thinking and color mixing much easier. To change the ground from the Quinacridone red to a more orange color, I placed a glaze of nickel azo yellow. Using a palette knife and a rubber-tipped color shaper, I am placing chromium oxide green on the places that are the darks. Just as I did in the tonal value study, I'm joining the shadows from the background mountain into the trees in the foreground. These vertical strokes running through the water give a sense of reflections. To create a blue-green color, which is the coolest color on your wheel, I'm going to use Phthalo Blue green shade, which is quite cool, and a cadmium yellow light, which is also a cool color. Whenever you add white to a color, it cools and dulls as well. As an option to mixing your blue-green, you can buy Cobalt Teal in the tube, or Phthalo Turquoise, which you can tint with the titanium white. To train your eye to better see the value of color, doing these kind of studies is very helpful. I'm looking at the tonal value study done in Grayscale and then trying to match the shade with the color that I am now mixing on my palette and placing onto the painting. In the color studies, I will slightly change the value of each of these three shades, just making sure that I have a distinct step between the light, the midtone, and the dark. As I place down this blue-green color, I'm careful to create interesting shapes that are varying in sizes. Next, I decided to key in the painting by adding some of the lightest colors, which includes the sky and the glacier. As usual, I continue to refer to my tonal study and the photograph. To represent the mountainside rocks and the rocks in the foreground, I'm mixing ultramarine blue, cadmium orange, and white. This can make great grays. You can move it to the warm side by adding more orange or more blue to go to the more blue side, or somewhere in the middle to mix a very centered or middle gray. An option to mixing this color, you can take raw umber and add white. Here I'm taking care to mix a mid-tone color, and I'm going to lighten it just a little bit, but staying in the mid-tone range. Acrylic paints always dry quite a bit darker, so I have to keep this in mind while I'm doing my color mixing. Also, I plan to do some glazes, so even though it looks a little light here, I do plan to put a color glaze on top, which will further darken that mid-tone. For the foreground rocks, I will use two shades, a mid-tone and a lighter mid-tone. I'll follow these mid-tones with a little bit of highlight on the top edge of some of the rocks. While painting, I try to make my marks interesting by moving the palette knife around, and if I was using a brush, I would do the same thing. So consider the strokes, and throughout your painting, you want to have some consistency of brush strokes as well, just to create unification. I'm not sure how I want to do those grasses above the rocks, so I'm going to try a little bit of cadmium orange, which I will later do some glazes, and then because there's some cad orange there, I want to pull it down into the foreground as well. Some of the blue-greens you see too will no longer be blue-green, but will become green after doing glazes of yellow. Now that I have the mid-tones and lights keyed in, I'm going to start darkening the dark areas. Once those dark areas are done in the midground, the background, and the foreground, I'll go back to some of the midtones and bring some neutrals down into the water. When painting reflections in water, I will pull marks straight up and down and also crossways across the picture plane. The crossways marks, horizontal marks, remind people that this is a flat area of water, and the vertical marks feel like the reflections of trees and rocks. Also, while doing the reflections in the water, I'm trying not to go too light. If I go too light, it will fight with the sky above, and it'll also take away from the focal point of the mountains. I realized that when I was doing this painting and doing the original rocks, that I was painting fairly tired and was not thinking about the brightness of the painting. I wanted to do a painting that was brighter rather than the neutral colors I saw within the photograph. So here I've changed the foreground rocks into violet colors, and I'm still considering what to do about the grasses above those rocks. I've also added bits of violet into the background glacier, and I'm doing the sky a little bit lighter because I want to do some glazes on there which will further darken it, and the sky needs to be lighter than what I had it. So here I put some quinacridone red on the sky, and here I'm trying ultramarine blue on top of that teal, which I quite like, and I don't mind that in the foreground as well. Later on when I'm playing around, continuing to paint while I'm a little bit too tired, I make changes again. But here there's some options that I would consider in the painting later on. The darks got a little too heavy looking in the trees, so I'm taking titanium white and whiting out all the dark areas and then reglazing with the red and then the glaze of the yellow. After redarkening with the dioxazine violet, I added little bits of chromium oxide green on the edges of those trees. The green is not working for me. I decided that I needed to move to the cool color of magenta. When assessing the painting on the left, I realized that it was half bright, half dull, and also half cool and half warm. We want to have a dominance in the painting, so by adding the more bright magenta edges on the sides of the trees where they're side or backlit, that helped a lot because magenta is a cool color. Then I added some of the pink colors, with magenta plus white, into the violets of the rocks and into the sky as well. There's also a violet color added into the shadows of the trees, some blue, greens, and purples added to the water below. I think this makes this painting overall cool and a lot brighter. I also brightened the orange areas of the hillside. This warm color makes a nice contrast to the majority of cools. Well, I learned something along the way of painting the study, and one of them was when I have a really bad night's sleep, maybe it's not the best thing to paint the next day, but perhaps to work on other types of things before painting. Having said that, I still look forward to doing a larger painting of this little study. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe for notice of new videos. Take care.